Bismillahi walhamdulillahi wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. When we look at the state of dawah in the post Malcolm X phase, specific as it relates to the African American community and overall to those who are born in the context of the United States, we see that a lot of changes have taken place. So, along with the reality of those who convert to Islam, we have the reality of those who are first generation Muslims. In the phase that we are living in now, it's a phase in which there's been a lot of transformational changes. Recently, I was heavy hearted. Heavy hearted. I read a few write ups, or I read a write up and I was listening to a few talks with regard to the passing away of the daughter of Malcolm X. And I had intended to go to the funeral, and just based on my physical condition, it was not really possible. So, in other responsibilities that I had, and even from a mental health perspective, I had to pull away because of the issue of um, just thinking about what has happened within his family, with his grandson, and then with his daughter now, and just thinking about where we're at, and thinking about the conditions specifically, of the Black Muslim community. There is a lot to be said about what's going on. I think that there's a general tendency of feeling within the Black community that there's this new age that we are in where it's important to talk about the continuity of the Black Muslim community and its growth in a different way than what was being spoken to in the past. And this is what I gather from experience and from listening to leadership and the people in general, and so on and so forth. And so when we look at the situation that we're in one in which not only is there a necessity to talk about the continued existence of the African American community with regard to its institutions and the youth and so on and so forth. We are in a time period where uh, the non-Black Muslim community is under a lot of strain, and that doesn't mean that there weren't issues there before, but there's just some peculiarities of this time period in which we're seeing some issues, and the sociological data is there, and for those who don't have it, then it shows that we don't really have an understanding of the society that we live in. I'm speaking more to those who are in dawah and they're not really well versed with what are the conditions of peoples in general. Um, and specifically, one of the issues that we confront, and I talked about this before, but in a different way, is that we're seeing people engage in dawah. And for whatever reason, when it comes to dealing with the Black community, rather than looking at the achievements of the Black community and the strengths of the Black community, and if you're going to deal with the social issues, then you deal with the social issues, understanding those social issues, how it is that they're understood in the Black community. In other words, you have to study under the Black community to understand what it is that the Black community understands of itself. And then, if you're not from that community, you try to represent as much as possible. If you're going to ally or you're going to align or whatever it may be, in that regard, be a support. You have to learn how to allow the people to speak for itself, right? Learn to allow the people to speak for itself. And so what happens is that that's not happening. And we're having, and it's becoming a problem because what you are seeing is a number of people that have gone to study or they're in the dawah platform. They speak on black issues without the expertise. And then the issues that are brought up are done so in a way which supports a racist narrative. And we have told some brothers that have studied that they should lay off of those types of discussions because they haven't grasped the sociological, social political dynamics. Neither do they know anthropology. You know, they're not well versed in how to deal with statistics properly that deal with these types of issues, social dynamics. They're not familiar with, you know, certain cultural studies or black studies. And we try to tell them, let's speak from knowledge, right? Let's speak from knowledge. So there is this tendency that is an anti-black tendency, whether it's conscious or not conscious. But I'll say that some of it is conscious. You understand what I'm saying? What the underlying intention is, Allahu A'lam. You know, but there is this position that people are taking. And when they talk about the black community, they have a tendency of talking about the black community from a perspective of scourge, a people that is scourged, and not from the angle of a people that is, you know, oppressed, or a people that overcomes, you know, and trying to deal with social issues from that angle, but from the angle of like almost like a cursed people. That came that type of angle came out a while ago. You know, when we look at the issue of what was said in Africa by one of the heads, in the Canadian sector of Dawa, or one of the leading, or one of the face figures that's out there. You know, he went to Africa to talk negatively about the African American community. And then, you know, we had others, and that was Said, Said, Imam Said from the Somali community. He took that type of position. Then we had people like, Daniel Hakikaju. He came out and he talked about the George Floyd case, and the approach that he took to it was a repetition of the same narrative that we see in the racist right, because we know all the right is not necessarily always racist, or all the conservatives, but in the racist right, he took that type of position. And before, we have had exchanges on these issues. The issue came up in recent times with Saajid. And so what happens is that what becomes more problematic is that the people who are taking these positions in recent times happen to be from the European American Salafi community. And then prior to that, we see from the African community, and so on and so forth. So what that does immediately it puts a wedge between various communities and the African American community, because the position that's being taken is one that is negative. And so when we look at, for instance, where we're at in the post Malcolm phase, what Malcolm X gave us was a description of the conditions of the African American people institutionally and psychologically, and he attempted to address these issues. And so he did a scholarly presentation that is rooted with life experience and communal experience, to talk about the way that the American social structure has evolved itself on the backs of what we would call blacks. And so the issue that comes up now, because one of the main issues that was coming up recently was the whole issue of, do you call yourself a black first or Muslim first, and this and that. And Saajid brought this up, and during a time period within the context of the Rittenhouse case, and in hindsight of everything that took place within with the Black Lives Matters uprising, which didn't just include the Black Lives Matters organization, but it included a global uh, support system. It was not only a group, a particular uh, organization that is registered as a nonprofit with a particular agenda, but that became symbolic of the struggle for black liberation, human rights issues on a societal level and at a global level. And so it would seem that we would have a little more sensitivity when we start to talk about these issues. And this claim that there's, for instance, that there's been this shift in people's understanding of Islam because they identify, say, for instance, with um, saying that I'm black first and that I'm Muslim or whatever. This shows that we have entered into a series of discussions in which we're not um, we're not conscious of the legacy of Malcolm, and neither are we conscious of what it is that we need to understand in these societies that we deal with. And the identification of Africans with blackness is a big deal in itself because in the first case, um, we mentioned, like for instance, when it came to Imam Said, that the for instance he differentiated between the African community and the black community, and he painted the black community with a scourge, a scourge people type of concept, like a cursed people, like the people of Ham curse, which we know that that's a racist metaphor, for to use to justify a system, an apartheid system. We know that. And so, when we start looking at these types of ideas, like for instance, the idea of blackness, we have to realize that the idea of blackness, where the term comes from and the concept, blacks themselves have to define themselves. You know what I'm saying? People of African descent in the diaspora are the ones that have a right to define themselves. And so we learn what the meaning of that is, because the reality of the situation is that the concept of blackness is not equivalent to the concept of whiteness. Whiteness is uh, an idea that deals with the national unity of people of European descent, specifically, within the context of the US, and then it goes out further. But the idea of whiteness, in many ways, is a different type of concept than blackness. Why? Because blackness in the diaspora signifies a historical moment, what we call the Ma'atha, which is the time period in which people of African descent were taken from the continent of Africa, and they were taken as prisoners of war into different forms of captivity. And those people, they established themselves in different places. And there was slavery that was involved in that, and there was a number of issues that come up after the societal slavery. There's a number of issues like incarceration and impoverishment and segregation and so on and so forth. In any event, these events were preceded by the Ma'afa, or what we call transatlantic slavery. And what that did was it took people and it uprooted them from their historical lands, and it limited their lineage from being able to the understanding of their lineage. It limited the understanding of their lineage from being able to say, well, I'm from this village in Ghana, or I'm from this place in the Congo, or I'm from Senegambia in this particular village. It limited people from being able to identify distinctively in the way that Africans people do. They take back their lineage. If you go to certain places in Nubia, you'll find that people can go back, way back. We're not talking about like 5 ancestors back. They can go way, 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 way back. And so, what blackness means then is something different than whiteness, because with whiteness there was not a trumping of lineage, in that way. That became a national identity that was generated As a matter of fact, it was generated in opposition to blackness. It was generated to support the whole concept of um, a segregated society. And those who have sociological studies, they know that, and those who have historical studies, they know that to be the case when they look at what took place in Virginia, because at that time there was inter-tribal rather than saying inter-race. There were people from European tribes uh, going into relationships with people of African tribes. If we want to remove ourselves from the race talk, and so the reality of the situation is that when people talk about the black community and they happen to be white, and they don't want to deal with these detailed issues, it begins to look a little funny to us. Those of us who affiliate with blackness in one way or another, those who either embrace it or genetically is there, it looks funny. It looks very strange, that type of conversation comes because it's a conversation that is uninformed. And so when we talk about uh, whether what comes first, talking about Muslim or talking about blackness, it really doesn't make a lot of sense from one angle. From one angle, we can understand the point, يعني that مرجعية الكتاب والسنة يعني هي مرجعية لكل مسلم. We can run with that the reference point for every Muslim is the book and the Sunnah. But now to say that you have to say I'm Muslim first, that doesn't make sense. You understand what I'm saying? Because if the knowledge is not there to work through your identity, what does it mean to say that I'm Muslim first? And my advice to the Salafi brothers is that when you start getting into these discussions, you have to realize that you're putting yourself into a conundrum with yourself because you created for yourself an identity that you are Salafi, that you are a Muslim that is Salafi. So show us in the book in the Sunnah where there's a clear dalil to say that you're Salafi. We know that there's a clear dalil in the Quran that we're called Muslims. So then it's like, why do you identify yourself first as Salafi or as a Muslim that's Salafi as a referential point? Wasn't it sufficient for you to just say that you're Muslim? I know the debates. Yeah, so we're not going to go into those debates. I know those debates. I know the positions that Sheikh Uthaymeen has taken, the positions that Sheikh Al-Albani has taken, the positions that Sheikh Rabi and them have taken. So we're not going to enter that type of debate, right? But the point is that you yourself take it upon yourself to identify yourself in a certain way. Why? Because of what realities? But then you negate to a people, right, that has been engaged in the human rights liberation struggle for hundreds of years, and they have come to a determination on these realities of why it's important to identify this way or that way, or redefine, even to redefine the identity. You come into that discussion, whether it's in the UK or whether it's here in the US, you come into that discussion without taking into consideration any nuanced positions at all, and you try to make it an issue of Aqidah. And I'm specifically speaking to, Sheikh Saajid. You know what I'm saying? You you come in to the discussion and you try to make it an issue of Aqidah. If we're gonna make it an issue of Aqidah, then I was indicating to this earlier today indirectly in another format. The maqasid of the Sharia have the issue of hifd al-nasab or hifd al-usra, or hifd al-nasl, however you want to put it. The preservation of the lineage and preservation of the family, continuity of all. So then how do we talk about the black community having continuity, right? If we don't identify it. If it was such a problem, why is it in the maqasid of the Sharia there's no contradiction between the concept of hifdul din and hifdul usra or hifdul nasl? Why is there no contradiction there? Contradiction is a contradiction which is false. We understand the issue of nationalism and so on and so forth, but the reality at the end of the day is that the nationalism that is in the black community is not the nationalism that is in the white community. You understand what I'm saying? The nationalism in the white community, is one which has been set up on a color-based system in opposition to the black community. We can get into a discussion on the problems of nationalism, right? When it comes to excluding others, we can get into the deficiencies of nationalism and where it is that it contradicts the Deen and so on and so forth. If that's the discussion that you want to have, then that's a different discussion. The limitations and the problems of nationalism. But to bring into question the issue of Aqidah, right? If someone were to say that they're black first, and then, or they should say that they're Muslim first, and this and that, without talking about any of the other nuances, it becomes a problem for many of us. It's either a conversation that you're having because you saw some material that caught your eye, you thought you can make a video off of it, and you wanted to make a comment, but it's not a knowledge-based conversation. And this is not the first encounter that I've had on this subject with you, brothers. You understand what I'm saying? And I keep telling you that from the angle of dawah, from the angle of minhaj, this is a faulty minhaj. And this was not the only, this was the issue that I had also with Sheikh Farouk Post on the issue of saying my people. When I brought out tens of ayats of the Quran saying, Ya qawmi, that we can say our people, that is not against the deen. And I mentioned this before, and I'll mention it now clearly. It appears to be that a segment of the Salafi dawah has been heavily influenced by the fikr of Sayyid Qutb. And when it comes to the issue of identity and taking the idea of Muslim as a national identity, and that's the understanding of Sayyid Qutb in Milestones. And some of you, it seems that you have been influenced, and don't take it as a yani ana la hawla an asqutukum, yani that's not the issue. Is not isqat, right? Because my minhaj is not a minhaj of jarh wa ta'dil based on the minhaj of Sheikh Rabi'a and them. You know what I'm saying? I'm talking fundamentals of knowledge. What is the minhaj of knowledge when we deal with issues, when we deal with sciences, whether it's sociology or usul al-fiqh and all of these types of things. That's the angle that I'm coming from. But and then looking at ideas, but your understanding of identity is one which is more in line with Sayyid Qutb than it is with anything else. Because Sayyid Qutb is the one, يعني هو يجرد الهوية، يعني يجود هوية النفس. And so he's the one that removes any other. He's the one that removes the identity, the characteristics of the identity of the person. He removes from them the idea of nationality and ethnicity and so on and so forth, like if that's a reality. And so with that concept, Sayyid Qutb had the issue of al-Hakimiyyah involved in that. See, the issue that, for instance, I was called and I'll bring this up because it is indirectly relevant, but it's not directly relevant, and I don't hold anything in my heart about it. But I'm not going to say that it doesn't hurt from the angle of brotherhood. When I was called, and I leave the person unmentioned, an Ikhwani chameleon. You understand what I'm saying? So okay, so now this Ikhwani chameleon has the ability to critique Sayyid Qutb head on. What about the Salafi that has aligned with the right wing, with the right wing conservative white nationalist camp? Why don't you have the ability to engage in self-critique? You understand what I'm saying? And to criticize your ideas, because that's necessary. And like I said, let's open this up as a dialogue, because where you're faulty at is in not taking the experience of people that have been involved in dawah for a very long time, longer than you have been involved in dawah. And so, for instance, when we look, the black community has tried that. The whole idea of just saying that I must ask the black community where that has gone. They have taken that idea, right? Their idea, and lived it in a different way than Sayyid Qutb mentioned it and brought it up. You understand what I'm saying? and see what has happened as a consequence of the community dealing with it. Don't ask Yusuf Rios. Ask directly, sit at the table and see where that idea has gone within the last 20 years, especially within the context of the Salafi Dawah. The idea that we're just Muslim, we have this idea of an abstract ummah. We don't have to deal with our people. See where that idea, our family, see where that idea has gone, and see if that idea was not destructive or not. And I put in my 2 cents by saying that. See if it was not destructive or not. The problem that I have is that if we're going to criticize the whole idea of nationalism, you know what I'm saying, then why hasn't any of these topics come up with regard to what has gone on in this society, like white nationalism? Why is it that the European Salafi du'at, and I say Salafi because we have other people. We have people like, for instance, that are in the spotlight, like the lawyer Joe Milburn, like the Professor Sheikh Hamza Dajjal. These are people from the European American community, like Imam Suhaib Webb. These are people that are from the European American community that have dealt with these issues of race and ethnicity and so on and so forth, and they've dialogued those issues and have even dealt with the whole concept of European American identity. But for whatever reason, the European Americans that come in the Salafi Dawah, that have taken a leadership role when we start talking about white supremacy, when we start talking about the problems with it, when we start addressing these issues, there's like a clapback. Like, now we're talking يعني نتكلم بالوهم. It's whimsical talk. It's not talk which is rooted in the deen, that we have a Muslim identity, but we never address the social issues. We never address the social issues, whether they're structural, whether they're cultural, whether they're psychological, whether they're political, whether they're economical. We can't just negate the reality of the physical world that we're in, and the legal systems that we deal with, and the cultural realities and history and so on and so forth, to just jettison all of that to say that we have this identity which is Muslim, which is abstract, which is not even clear what that means at the end of the day. We're Muslim. What does that mean? Muslim living in what you can't even get a hukum shari'i like that. The hukum shari'i, doesn't operate like that. The hukum shari'i, it operates off of the concept that you have to deal with time and place and a person. And I mentioned this before in the other talk. يعني الأحكام متعلق يعني بالزمان والمكان والإنسان. That's minhaj. That's a minhaj. That's the minhaj of the ulama, not the minhaj of Yusuf Rios. That's the minhaj of the ulama when we're dealing with the ahkam of the sharia. When it comes to coming to an intellectual judgment, الحكم فرع عن التصور. You can't come to a conclusion or a judgment on something unless you understand that thing properly. And that's the ulama, they use that in mantiq, in logic, in usul al-fiqh, and so on and so forth. You understand what I'm saying? And come back to usul al-fiqh with the issue of urf and adah. The al-adat wal-araf, when it comes to custom and norms and so on and so forth. And يعني هذا معتبر دليل شرعي. And evidence in the Sharia is recognized in cases where there's no nas. And so the issue that we have is that why is the black community singled out? That's the problem that I have. And the same thing, the same problem takes place in the UK. My contention is that the community in the UK and the community specifically in the US, now I generalize it a little more, not just addressing Saajid, has internalized anti-blackness. You understand what I'm saying? Has internalized a sense of anti-blackness, where the said proposition of authenticity is to negate anything black. And this is why there's these constant debates amongst us in the community. Because how the heck are we going to alienate a large segment of the community, whether they're people of African descent from the continent or people of African descent that are born here in the US? How is it that we're going to continue to do this, and it goes unsaid? That's the issue. And this is why people don't, personally, I know why people don't like me, because I bring this up. I bring this type of stuff up, and I say that we need to stop it. And I'm not saying this from a platform of ego. I'm saying this from a platform of deen, which deen is superior to ego. It's superior to Yusuf Rios. How can we talk about, preservation of the dignity of the human being? And I'm 100% with Imam al-Qarafi that this is from the maqasid of the Sharia. The ayah of the Quran proves it to be so. لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي Adam. So how is it that we, indirectly or directly attack the dignity of a group of people, and we keep walking with that? You understand what I'm saying? This is what is taking people out of the dawah. This is what is causing people not to want to be around the Muslims. This is what causes mental health issues. This is what displaces our youth with high melanin content, because they don't feel that they have a place in the community, because what they experience in the society is not addressed by the people that are supposed to be representative of religious discourses. The people that are supposed to say that they represent Tawheed, and they talk about the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they're the first ones to alienate the black community when it comes to the dawah. And at a certain point, you brothers need to start to retract what you're saying. Like I said, you sound closer to the ideas of Sayyid Qutb, when it comes to identity, than you do to the Sahaba themselves, because the Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'in, they never negated their lineage. They never negated their lineage, and they found themselves in a situation where they had to address the ethnic problems that were there among them, the tribal problems, and they didn't negate their tribal identities. This idea that we're just this people, a Muslim without anything else, it doesn't work, because there's no way. How are you going to talk about collective memory? How are you going to talk about justice? How are you going to talk about compatibility in marriage or anything like that? You know what I'm saying? So it's a false claim. It's a false claim to bring that up in that manner. You know what I'm saying? That we're just Muslim, and that's it. I understand the goal, and I understand the objective, to call people to unity. But this, and I mentioned this before, and I mentioned this to all non-European Muslims. We have to push we have to push the European Muslims, specifically in the context of the US, to find themselves, to find an identity for themselves. They have to confront themselves. They can't just melt in to be Arabs, or to be Somalis, or to be Latinos, or to be African Americans, or whatever. They have to find themselves. Then if they want to join any of those communities, if they want to be adopted by those communities, that's on them, no problem. Right? But this is part of the problem, that we in the Muslim community, the way we deal with culture and identity and so on and so forth at this point is very immature. Right? But there's no doubt it was this time was going to come that the European community, European American community, has to identify itself. And yes, it has to do muraja to nafs. It has to review what it is that has happened in the society, sometimes by their ancestors, sometimes by people from their collective community, of what it is the contribution of oppression is to other peoples. Just like the Latino has to come in and review what's from our culture, which is problematic. You understand what I'm saying? Just like anybody else, right? But the constant singling out of the black community, you know what I'm saying, is very troublesome. That stuff is troublesome. And we live in a time period where we went through a whole year of uprisings. Like, we should have a more nuanced discussion on these issues. But it seems like what the Muslim community adopts is the rhetoric of the racists, the rhetoric of the racists, the rhetoric of those who created the color-based apartheid type system, and they want to maintain it. Why? Why do the Muslims contribute to the upholding of that type of ethic? And to claim that we're just going to have an Islam without dealing with context is absurd. The fatwa system itself, by itself, deals with the issue of the zaman, time period that you live in, the makan, the place that you live in, and the insan, the human being that you are. living under those conditions. Can you imagine Abu Bakr as-Siddiq going to Bilal al-Habashi and saying, yeah, we're all Muslim. We're just all Muslim, Bilal, and forget about the whole issue of dealing with the social conditions. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.